Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Bethany and Jim,
Yep.
thanks for joining us.
Happy snowy Friday.
It is a snowy Friday.
Yeah, and like you were saying, it's heavy too, like snowflakes.
I was not expecting this much snow. Originally, I wasn't expecting any snow.
Yeah.
This was a abrupt change in the forecast. They just kind of made it last night.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
anyway,
So Pastor Larry is in Texas for VBS training. And so I thought I'd hop in with Paul today. It reminds me of the old times where he was gone on sabbatical and we would do Driving Jesus on Fridays.
that's right. Yep.
Yep.
So just for old time's sake,
Yep.
we're getting together again.
And it works. I was telling Paul I came in this morning and my dad changed the computer, so it's a different computer, and I had forgotten that. So I because the old computer's over there, I'm trying to like click the on button, and I'm like, that's not working. So I had to call him. But we're up and running this morning. Morning, Jim. Morning, Bethany. Yep.
And thank you for braving the snow to
Yep.
get here.
Mm-hmm. When I walked out this morning to feed our outside cats, I was like, oh no. But I'm wearing a sweater, like not because I normally wear short sleeve, but not today. So yeah.
Yeah, today would have been a great day to just stay at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I have a big girl job now, and so I have to do work. It is remote, but I do prefer coming up to the church and working where there's like no distractions.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, on Wednesday, Larry and Jim mentioned that knowing why we are making the change helps us to be able to make the change. In other words, we make the change when it seems that it is worth it. Keeping the mission in mind helps us to know that the cost of making the change is worth it. I think that's an important thing to have, is to always remember the mission, so that way what you're doing, you have it in mind, if that makes sense.
Yes. Change just for the sake of change really annoys me. Like, why are we doing this? Things are fine. Hey, Kim. Things are fine. Why are we changing it?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have a good answer for that, you're just going through a lot of thrash for no good reason.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, a lot of people get upset about that.
Yeah.
It was fine before.
Right. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yep. That's what I've heard a lot.
Yep.
But we have some questions for you guys. We're going to start off Driving Jesus with questions. Kim has a snowflake on her good morning because it's snowing.
Yeah, you're right.
I just wanted to point that out.
I noticed that too.
Okay, so the first question we have for you guys is, what makes change so hard? That's a very interesting question. That's like a long-ended question, I feel like.
Well, I mean, first of all, that acknowledges that change is hard, or it can be.
Yeah.
And so, why is that? I mean, do you guys agree, first of all, that change can be hard? And if so, what's driving that to be so hard? Why does it have to be so hard? Why does it have to be so hard?
I think a lot of it is if you don't agree with the change. I think that has a lot to do with it too, where I think it would be easier if you agreed with the change. But if you don't agree with the change, that's hard. Kim says sometimes you need to change your approach, but not your content. That's true. You have to change the method, not the mission. The method of the mission.
And let me poke at that a little bit. Why do you sometimes need to change the method?
Because the world changes. Change is hard, and you can pull you out of your comfort zone. Yeah.
I think that's why people are resistant to change right there, because we all have our comfort zones.
Yes.
Right? You finally get settled into what you like and what you can get nice and comfortable in, and then somebody changes it.
Mm-hmm. Kim said, routinists, or dare I say, ruts are easy.
Yeah, well, and the analogy of a rut, I think, is appropriate because when you stay in a rut, it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and it gets harder to climb out of.
Yeah.
So get to the point where even if you want to get out of a rut, you can't.
I would agree. I agree with Kim. Change pulls you out of your comfort zone, and that's hard, especially if it's cozy in your comfort zone. It's like getting out of bed in the morning when it's cold. You just want to stay in your bed. So I think it has a lot to do with comfort zone.
Right. But getting back to the other thing that was brought up, that sometimes you need to change the method and not the content. I think the reason we need to change our method occasionally is because despite our best efforts, the world is changing around us. So methods that used to work may not work anymore, or may not be optimized anyway.
Right.
We've spent a lot of time talking about the upcoming generations and how different they are from past generations. Well, the old methods may not reach the new generation as well as it reached the old generation. So we may need to tweak the method. But yeah, it is important, especially for the church, not to change the content.
Right.
Because, the Bible hasn't changed.
Right.
We're not changing anything that's being preached.
Right.
We just need to think of a new way to reach a new generation.
And I think it's important for churches and people in the churches to clearly like state that, like, to other members in the church, like, hey, like what we're teaching isn't changing. Like, yeah, like you're right. Just let's get that out, like, right now. But how we're teaching it is changing. But because I think you're right. If the Bible is God's living word. If it's not changing, and if we change that, then we have a whole different issue. The next question is, why are we so reluctant to change? So we answered what makes change so hard. And the next is, why are we so reluctant to change?
Well, we did touch on it a little bit. I think that comfort zone has an awful lot to do with it.
Yeah. We're
resistant to change because we're comfortable where we are. And yeah, like your example of not wanting to get out of bed in the morning because you're nice and cozy and warm, and it's cold outside. It's like, oh, why would I want to leave this, the comfort of my bed, to face that cruel, cold, uncaring world?
Yeah. And it was like this morning, I didn't want to get out of bed, but I knew if I stayed there for 5 more minutes, I was going to regret it when I was actually up and getting ready. But I think also why we're so reluctant to change is because I think just change has a bad connotation. Like when we hear change, we automatically like, oh my gosh, And so I think if we kind of get away from this idea that change is bad, we can really lean into good changes. Kim said change can be an unknown quantity. What if it doesn't work?
That's right.
Yes.
There's some uncertainty there. I could change things and make it worse.
Right. Yeah. Good morning, Jenny. But yeah, Kim hit it on the head. Because we don't know if we change this aspect, if it's gonna flop, or succeed. But I think in that sense, we just have to go along with what God says. Obviously, God is leading this church into, change for His glory, and I think we have to decipher what God is telling us to do and what Satan is telling. You know what I mean? So, if it's something, just depending on what it is, Kim said, call it an update. They will always work. I think, and you're right, Kim, it's just the wording. if we say like, I'm trying to think of an example. So if we say, I'm going to change the coffee area, that kind of has a negative, like how, like what's going to change. But if we say, I'm going to update the coffee area, I feel like people are more like, oh, okay. What do you think?
Yes, messaging is very important. One of the reasons that change can be hard, or we are reluctant to embrace change, is because unfortunately there has been an awful lot of change just for the sake of change. We were talking earlier that I work with the military quite a bit, and every couple of years we'll get new commanders, because the command cycle is only 2 years long. So a new commander comes in and he has all these great ideas, and he's going to make some changes and he's going to implement them before he leaves. So that means every 2 years you're getting a whole bunch of new ideas. And so there's a lot of thrash going on. The pendulum is swinging wildly from one side to the other. And the rest of us who are going to be there for more than 2 years are saying, why did we do that? And so change for the sake of change is generally not a good idea. I like the way you put it. Let God direct the change. There's a lot of documented evidence in the Bible where God was directing change. You think of Abraham. Hey, he was pretty comfortable where he was, and God said, hey, how about if you just pick up everything and move? Okay, if you say so, God. I mean, he embraced change. I know your dad talks an awful lot about, I wonder what Sarah was thinking at the time. He's like, what are we doing? Where are we going? Why are we doing this? But if the answer is because God is directing it, I mean, really, you look at Moses. God was directing a change there, and it wasn't God just sitting back saying, yeah, I know, I think it's time for a change.
Right.
No, it's like, no, this is what's good. This will be beneficial.
Right. There's a purpose
for my people. Right.
Yeah. And I think too, like you bring up a good point with the military. You're like, you said that, these commanders, like they just change for the sake of change, and they're not there to see the consequences of the change. And I think if you, especially in a church sense, if the pastor, changes something, or, like, God tells him, like, this is what, God leads his heart, the pastor, like, I feel like has to, like, stay there, pastor just can't come into a church and be like, okay, let's change this. Oh, I'm leaving,
right.
And the church suffers. So I think there's this idea of, we have to kind of be there when it changes, and we have to stick it out,
Yeah. What I really appreciate, we do get commanders who come in and say, I'm not making any immediate changes. I'm going to I want to see how things actually are working and see what needs to be changed before I start implementing anything. And those turn out to be some of our strongest commanders, where every change they do make, it's a positive change, and we understand why, where you can point to something and say, you know what, that's not working very well. Do you think we could tweak it?
Right. I think a good leader changes things for a purpose, but also is there to see it through. And that's because that's important, especially in a church sense, and even in a work sense too. Like, what's the point, besides changing things for the sake of changing things?
Now, another thing to consider is if you're making periodic updates all along, the change is not as abrupt, not as so that, I mean, if you wait forever until you have to make a change, it's going to be a massive change, because you should have been making tweaks all along the way, and now, nope, nothing is working. We're going to do something completely different. And wow, talk about shaking people out of their comfort zones when you do things like that. So you don't want to wait too long to make a change.
Right.
You need to really be evaluating all the way through the life cycle and say, we need to make a tweak here, so that you don't get that abrupt change. That's what people are really going to be struggling with. Those abrupt changes.
I think an example, like when we did the outside of our building, I feel like that, I think a part of implementing change and changing or updating is we have to talk about it. We have to constantly talk about it. So when we were about to redo the outside of the church, we were talking about it. It just wasn't like, okay, if my dad just didn't go one Sunday, okay, we're gonna, this week we're ripping the boards off. We constantly talked about it. And I think this update on the church was a very positive thing, because I don't know if you heard any talk, like people in the community, like we would go to Black Bear and people would be like, oh my gosh, the church looks so good. Even like just restaurants all over, people who don't attend our church would, tell us like, it looks so good, so that was definitely a positive.
I was going to say that's a great example of a positive change, but it's
Mhm.
also a pretty significant example of probably waiting too long to
Yeah.
no, if we would have been fixing it all along,
Right.
first of all, it wouldn't have cost as much as it did to make the big change that we needed to make.
Mhm.
And maybe people wouldn't have even have noticed as much if
Right.
we would have been making these little updates all along. But
Right.
we went like 70 years without any major
Yeah.
update. That was too long.
Right, because it got to the point where the wood was like rotting.
Right. Yeah, so of course it's going to look better when you
Right.
wait that long.
Yeah. The examples when you're talking about like slowly updating stuff so that way people don't notice. Have you ever heard of the example of like boiling a frog like in a pot? Like you like just turn the heat up a little bit.
Yep.
And so the frog doesn't even notice.
I do that all the time. They never notice.
Yeah. But it's
works with other animals too. Just kidding.
Not just frogs. But it's that same thing where, like I personally like, it's a good example of like the frog doesn't even know that the heat is turning up because you're doing it so slow. That just came to my mind when you were talking about that. Here is the last question for you guys, and this one's a thinker. How can we as individuals help to cultivate a culture of change?
The silence is deafening. What do you guys think? What can we do?
I think it's hard when we don't necessarily like aren't on, like, if it's a specific thing, it's hard if we're not like 100% on board with it. But just in general, I think I think the biggest thing, what we talked about, is we just have to trust God. Just, like, God, you're leading the church in this direction. I trust that it's, you have a purpose for this and it's going to be for your glory. And it's, like walking in faith, like, I trust you. We're going to do this because you're leading us this way. I think that's the biggest thing.
Well, how can you be certain that it's God leading you in a certain direction?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so that's part B of the question.
Yeah.
But
yep. Be willing to let your guard down, trust God, and trust the pastor. Yeah.
Right. And I think one way we as individuals can help with the process is we should be constantly evaluating our current status. Is there a change that needs to be made? I mean, if we just all sit back and let the pastor figure everything out without giving them, without telling them that there are things wrong, by the time things are really wrong, it's going to be a major change, and everybody's going to be up in arms about that. What do you do? But we can help. We can say, hey, you know what? This isn't working so well. Can we make an update here?
Right.
Can we tweak this process? Can we try something a little different here? And if we make those incremental changes along the way, people are going to be less resistant. So that's how we can be part of the process.
Right.
We can help the pastor or whatever change needs to be made. We can help influence in that way by identifying early things that need to be taken care of.
Mm-hmm. I think also just talking about it. So, like with the name change, we're the church is going to do. I think the first step is just talking about it, so that way it's not like and continue to talk about it. So it's not like we're just we haven't talked about it in a long time, and we're like, okay, we're gonna change it, or not talking about it at all, and because that's when people get defensive.
Right.
That's when they're really resistant.
Right. So we talked about the importance of the messaging.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Do we call it a change or an update?
Right.
Those are subtle messaging techniques, but valid.
Mm-hmm.
But I think not only talk about it among ourselves, it's definitely important to socialize ideas with the congregation and others in the community, perhaps. But let's not forget to pray about it. Ask God for His direction. He should be weighed into that discussion.
Right.
In fact, he should be leading the discussion.
Yeah.
But if we have an idea, I think it's important to bring that idea to God. Say, God, is this a good idea?
Right.
Is this really what you want us to do? And if not, show me where I can tweak my thinking.
Yeah.
So I can come up with a better idea.
Yeah. Bethany says, pray for leaders to make the right decisions. Yes.
There you go.
I think it's just I've seen so many times where they like people forget to like include God in the conversation, and so it's them spearheading this update or change or whatever, and it's most of the time it's like completely like in the wrong direction, of what God is leading, and so I think that's the main, that's the first step is praying and asking God,
right?
And
then, as Kim says, remembering to trust God and trust the pastor as our leader here. Sometimes God has some pretty radical ideas too, and for all of the right reasons, but He knows more than we do. So if He's going to lead us in a certain direction, trust Him. We can let our guard down. We can move in the direction that He wants to move us in.
Yeah, that's good.
But if we're not praying about it, we're not going to know that,
right? Yeah, I don't know. It's just change is hard.
Yeah,
it is.
We often say God is going to do what He wants done. God's will be done. It's either going to happen the easy way or the hard way. We can either go along with Him, or we can fight Him and fight Him and fight Him. And guess what? Who do you think is going to win that fight? God will win in the end. And if we're not taking steps to be part of that plan, we're just going to get beat up in the process.
Yeah, it's like that analogy where you're holding onto a rope and like someone's trying to take it from you, and the longer you hold on to it, like your hands, like the more your hands get hurt. But if you like let it go, your hands aren't hurt. I think that's the same, with change. If you just hold on to how things were, like your hands are gonna get so like rope burned. Yeah.
No, I think the strategy we need to really embrace it as individuals and as a church is let God lead the change.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's good.
We can help with the messaging to make sure everybody understands what the change is and why we're doing it, but God needs to be in charge.
Yeah. And I think the communication is key. And little preview into a Sunday sermon, we want to be better about communicating things with the church and just using the right wording for things, because wording is everything. So
yep. All right.
Yeah. Well, do you guys have anything else to add?
Did we miss anything?
I don't think so.
All right.
Do you want to pray us out, Paul?
Well, I suppose I can. All right. So, Father, thank you for this opportunity to think about change and change in the church. And we do pray to you to please guide us in changes that we need to make. Please give us the wisdom and the ability to make those changes and to communicate the changes and the intent behind those changes to the congregation and the community at large. We just lift all of the changes in our church and community to you and ask for your divine guidance to help us implement. Please be with us as we go into the weekend. We do pray for Larry as he travels and trust that you'll bring him back safely. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, you guys have a good weekend.
All right. Thank you, Jim.
All right. We'll see you Sunday or Monday. I don't know what they're going to talk about on Monday. We'll have to find out because they redid like the
That's
Monday
right.
Job on
Yeah,
Jesus.
it's going to be
It's like in the loop or something now.
in the know.
In the know, yep.
Yeah.
So you'll just have to tune in Monday to see what they talk about.
So basically what you're saying is you are currently not in the know. I
am currently not in the know.
Okay. All right. So everybody tune in on Monday to get in the know.
Yep. See you guys. This is always the awkward part.